Tim, welcome to Watch Want, and thanks for logging on. I have a real treat for you today because I can tell you it's been a treat for me. You're looking at the Chopard Louis-Ulysse The Tribute, limited edition of 150, 49.6 millimeters in 18 karat white gold. This watch, released in 2010 to celebrate 150 years of Chopard, takes Chopard's upscale L.U.C watch line to a place it's never been. In fact, a place very few have been, because this wristwatch, almost 50 millimeters in diameter, can also be worn as a pocket watch seamlessly in either case. And I can count on one hand the number of watches I've seen that have that capability. They're all high horology pieces, really exquisite haute de gamme pieces like the Bovet Fleurier Amadeo cased wristwatches, the once in a generation, it seems, Glashutte Original Julius Assman series, of which 25 are produced roughly every 4 to 5 years. Those are the only others I can think of that are really peers of this L.U. Chopard Louis-Ulysse. And again, we're talking as rare as hen's teeth on a rooster. This is a true rarity. Now, on the wrist, we find the greatest shock. And this was, for me, the sole surprise, because the craftsmanship met my expectations. The engineering, the execution, considering the players involved in this watch, and I'll get to that in a moment, everything lives up to the reputation, lives up to what you expect. But the bottom line is that this watch is wearable. That's the real surprise. On a wrist 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, the watch wears comfortably. The watch wears flat to the wrist, again, only 14.5 millimeters thick. That's extraordinary considering the thickness includes the cradle that allows this watch to be worn as a wristwatch. The watch itself, the actual watch body, is less than 12 millimeters thick, and that's quite extraordinary. The lugs are barely there. You can see right here, they don't project out from the case so much as they just sort of fall away from it. So between the very short lugs, the beautifully flat caseback provided by the underside of the cradle, and the fact that this watch is almost all case, really allows it to wear comfortably. It's not top heavy, it spreads its mass nicely, and a nice contributor to the effect that really compounds the tight, secure fit on the wrist is a very high quality, all alligator leather strap, and I want to highlight that because it's such a rarity in its own right. I often mention that really high quality straps, the ones that wear longest, that have the longest service lives, they tend to be made of alligator leather, but the bottom line with this one is that it's among the very few, and I mean very, very few, another rarity, that features alligator on both sides, not calfskin on the back. Alligator for longevity on both sides, but the tanning process for each and the cut of the skin used is different. It's rectangular scale on the top and tanned very hard for durability, for longevity, for service life. On the bottom, it's round scale, very soft, and colored in a contrasting rich brown. This is a beautifully built strap, and it's absolutely up to the standards and expectations engendered by the rest of this special edition. I also want to call out the buckle. While we're talking about the strap, buckles tend to get overlooked. Every once in a while, you'll see a truly exceptional deployant clasp, but for a buckle, basically just a pin and a metal loop, to stand out speaks to the quality of the execution as a whole. You can see the beveled flanks by hand, alternately polished, brushed on the shoulders, brushed on the top, but polished on the bevel, with a sort of compound curvature, a fluting that recapitulates the dynamic arc of the lugs themselves. There's a design continuity here and a quality of execution right down to the polished screw heads. The fact that screws are used to secure the bar for the pin at all. This piece looks and feels like $1 million. Everything about it does justice to Chopard's modern status as a manufacturer and to the history that the manufacturer seeks to honor with the L.U. Chopard Louis-Ulysse. Now, moving inboard, let's take a look at this case because it's rather extraordinary, both in and of itself and in the way it interacts with the wristwatch cradle. Now, the cradle is based on an ancestral design from Karl Scheufele I. Lived in the early 20th century, and one of his early designs, he was a goldsmith and a silversmith, was a cradle mechanism that would allow a pocket watch to be converted into a wristwatch. So this is not just a tribute to Louis-Ulysse, the founder of Chopard, it's also a tribute to the patriarch of the Scheufele family that has controlled Chopard since the early 1960s. Very secure. I was a bit skeptical about this thing until I saw it in person. because let's face it, something that's going to hold a watch on a cradle to be worn on the wrist, it just seems like too many degrees of separation between the body and the machine. And I didn't really know how the interface between cradle and gold case would work out in practice, how it would feel in the hand, whether I would feel secure to have such a large, heavy watch secured only by this cradle. First things first, it's not secured only by the cradle. There's also a looping strap right here that pins down. But second, it's remarkably secure in that there's a two-step release process that I'm going to show you in a moment, whereby you depress the cradle right here and you turn it a quarter turn clockwise to release the watch, and once it's released, it's completely out. Once it's secure, it feels like a mono block of gold. Very impressive engineering on that level, and beautifully finished, because this has what Chopard calls dynamic lugs. So although the lugs are short, they're beautifully executed. They have a compound curvature in that they flow downward, but they also slope off to the side, with two separate finishes, brushed on the side, polished on the hoods. They're also visually arresting, but they're just spare enough that they don't detract from the look of the watch head itself. What I really like is the fact that they're also polished on their undersides, so you have several layers of contrasting finish, polish, brushed, and then polish on the underside. Again, nothing was left overlooked. There was no default design, default finish here. Everything was executed deliberately. Now let me show you the dial, because the dial's a real highlight, and there's a lot of misunderstanding on the internet about the nature of this dial. I've seen it described as porcelain, others have described it as enamel. I want to set the record straight. What you're actually looking at, because of the required thickness of the movement within the case, is a piece of fired ceramic that has then been lacquer treated. All of the Arabic numerals, as well as the chapter ring, the dashes of red, the L.U. sigil right here at 12 on the subdial, that's all lacquered on top of a white lacquer base, which itself sits on top of a piece of fired ceramic. So that's the constitution of this dial, but the composition of the dial is the real standout. The abundance of lacquer means that this watch reads spectacular in direct light. I want to get any fingerprints I might have amassed right off this, because it deserves to be seen unobstructed. It's radiant in the sun, and it has a beautiful warm glow to it in low light. It's never matte, it's never flat, it always has a liveliness to it, and a big part of that is the way the raised, lacquered Roman numerals actually catch the light. The Romans have been part of the L.U. Chopard aesthetic since the line first launched in 1996, and they look perfect on this watch, which is a thing out of time. It's really a vision from another age, and the combination of the almost halo-like narrow bezel and the broad, high-gloss white, black, and red dial means that the watch reads almost as all dial. As big as it is, almost 50 millimeters, because of the dominance of the dial and the luster of it, the watch reads even larger. But it's a kind of distinguished size. It's not bulk for bulk's sake, it's presence, and this watch has it in spades. It also has a life to it and a liveliness that's born of the luster of the light playing across the lacquer, the contrast between the red and the white and the black, and those splashes of red really enliven the dial. The vintage look is compounded by the use of sector chapter rings. First of all, there's this railroad around the exterior of the hour track, and then recapitulated in miniature here at 6 o'clock for the sub-seconds. The hands themselves are a special feature of the L.U. Chopard line. Now, I once called them sort of fusion or hybrid Dauphine, but the actual inspiration behind them, what they're really getting at, is the caliper of a machine, the caliper of an architect's tools or an engineer's tool set. That's what this handset is designed to evoke directly. Beautifully rendered here, black oxidized gold. They're both intriguing in their shape and their finish, and I love the length of this minute hand here, projecting outward like a spire. It really does have the look of a caliper needle with a pin at the end. Precise, projecting, strong, jutting, the compound lines, the multiple facets, the high gloss, it all works, and it works beautifully in concert. But I want to show you the moment you've all been waiting for. I got to admit, this one had me curious too. So first I depress right here where indicated, and I turn about a quarter turn clockwise. And just like that, I can separate the pocket watch component, unbuckling that pin. That's the last line of defense in case you mess up. And now I have unfettered access to the watch head, and a glorious one it is. There is a lot going on here, and I want to start with the main event, the movement. This is known as the caliber EHG, the École Horlogère Genevoise. The bottom line is it was designed in conjunction with the Watchmaking School of Geneva by Chopard, so it is both a sort of school watch that the students were called into action to help design, but it's also one of the very few watches you'll ever see that is both COSC chronometer certified as well as blessed with Geneva's own imprimatur, the Poinçon de Genève. So this is Geneva Seal, chronometer certified, a collaboration between the highest horological authority in Geneva and Chopard's Fleurier manufacture. And everything you could want in terms of finish is right here. Micourt bridges and base plate. That's essentially the nickel copper compound, better known as German silver, but since we're in Geneva here, it's going to be Micourt. And the bottom line is it has a golden, radiant hue to it. The Côte de Genève, let me emphasize, not all of these Côte de Genève finishes are created equal. The best ones are regular, linear, perfectly in line across all bridges and cocks, and they have a gorgeous texture to them. Not just the wave pattern, but the texture in between needs to be rich and deep and expressive and complex, and here it is. All of the anglage is broad and mirror polished. I like the fat anglage that leaves as much of an angle, as much of a radius as possible to reflect light, makes it easier to see, easier to appreciate, and it is like having a watch under a permanent 2 or 3x loop because everything is just so huge. Let me give you a sense of how big this movement is. This is about 19.2 French lean, so over 43 millimeters in diameter. That's just the movement. For comparison, the Unitas 6497 in a Panerai Luminor, that's 16.5 lean, or about 37.5 millimeters. The movement in this Louis-Ulysse Chopard is almost the size of a Panerai Luminor. It's big, but it's also beautiful because, as I stated, all of the finishing standards, the great traditions of Geneva are here. You see black polish, not just on the flattened screw heads, which are chamfered and slotted, but also on the cock of the escape wheel, on the pallet lever, it's way in there, on every part of the swan's neck regulator and index stud holder, absolutely radiant. And then when you turn it away from the light, reflecting light only in one direction. That's how optically smooth it is. That's why it's called black polish. You see it gleam with brilliance only at one angle. From every other angle, it appears black. Quite dramatic, but also finished beautifully on the micro level. The closer you get to this watch, you can see the dished interior of the index needle that wraps around the shock protection on the capstone. Even that is mirror polished. The perlage is broad but regularly spaced, very tight between the overlapping loops. Everything about the machining of the base plate is gorgeous, and the finish continues deep into this huge wheel train. The barrel, again, beautifully finished with a radial sort of Côte de Soleil dressage. Beautiful. Everything about this is the standard you would expect from a Patek Philippe, but on a scale that's about 3 times the size. I can't say enough about the substance of this watch in the hand or the pleasure of winding it manually. It does have an 80-hour power reserve. It operates at a conventional pocket watch, 3 Hertz, so 21,600 vibrations per hour, 148 parts, and for a manual wind movement, generously jeweled with 20 jewels. This watch has it all. It really is overwhelming. Everything from the finish of the dial, the finish of the case, the solidity of the convertible carriage with the watch attached when it's on the wrist, as well as the improbably comfortable fit. The ergonomics of this watch just plain work. And that's the only real surprise, because considering the Watchmaking School of Geneva, considering Chopard Fleurier and the L.U.C top-of-the-line label, I expected it to be beautiful. I expected it to be special. I didn't expect it to work so well as a watch, and for me, that's the real surprise. So, if you're interested in absolute high horology, something that's completely unique, special, occasional, almost improbable in every way, this is a truly memorable piece. It's something you won't see again. It's a concept that's rarely even attempted, much less executed with mastery. This is the Chopard L.U.C Louis-Ulysse The Tribute, nearly 50 millimeters in 18-karat white gold. If you want a watch that is literally like none other, this is the watch you want.